Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jason Dean, Washington Post Intelligence, and our esteemed panel.
Thank you very much. My name is Jason Dean. I'm the lead AI and tech analyst for the Washington Post's WP Intelligence and a longtime technology journalist. And I'm excited to be here with you all today to talk about social media and AI, especially today because if you believe what's been on TikTok recently, this is our last day before the rapture comes. So thank you all for spending this final day with us. In all seriousness, I think social media over the past decade and a half has fundamentally reshaped how we get our information, what information we get, and how we understand the truth. And as we speak, generative AI is changing that again, and really, I think in many ways shifting even more power into the hands of a handful of big technology companies. So to talk about the implications that has for people, for international relations, for democracy, for human health and mental well-being, we have a really terrific panel. John Gable is the co-founder and CEO of All Sides, a group that works to combat bias, misinformation, and social division online. Julie Scelfo is a journalist who founded and is the executive director of Mothers Against Media Addiction, or MAMA. And Sophie Schmidt is the founder and publisher of Rest of World, which is a nonprofit publication focused on reporting about technology, particularly in places that typically get overlooked. Julie, let me start with you. Social media's impact, for better and for worse, has arguably been most pronounced on young people. In that context, what are you seeing so far about the effects of that generative AI is having?
So generative AI and chatbots in particular, especially those that have zero or modest safeguards, are already presenting a significant threat to our young people's well-being and even their physical safety. There's just been too many examples already of children who have been manipulated, traumatized, or even driven to self-harm or suicide by chatbots. You're probably familiar with the Sybil Setzer case in Florida or the Adam Rains in California. And so parents all over the country are very worried about these real threats and the fact that we haven't taken action to insist that safeguards be implemented. So what we're at MAMA looking for is for government to not wait to act. We've learned that lesson during social media. Moving fast and break things resulted in what is now almost the 4-year anniversary of what the American Academy of Pediatrics declared is a national emergency in child and adolescent mental health. We've seen suicide rates go up not only in teens but in tweens, which are children as young as 10. And so we cannot afford to put our basic humanity, our children, at risk by rushing products that we know aren't safe into the hands of children.
John, we have with social media the greatest distribution mechanism for information that we've ever had, the most people you could possibly reach. With AI, we have the ability to create new realities that are very, very believable. When you combine those two, how do you see our ability to understand what is true and what is real in the world that we are speeding into right now?
Well, the whole information ecosystem is being rewired right now. And I would also add algorithms and actually a lot of other things to that change in the way we get information and change in the way we communicate with each other. And that does impact us as human beings. When you only see information from one side or the other, and you only see that, we all become much more extreme in what we believe. We all become much less tolerant of other people or other ideas. And we tend to be told that it's only those other people that are wrong or biased or unaccepting, but it's actually impacting all of us. There's just too much data that says that. And part of what we can do is, I'm an old Netscape Navigator guy. I think some people here are old enough to remember Netscape Navigator. But there are times in society, from printing press to now, where things change radically. And you can use the new technologies to actually make them better as opposed to just kind of going off the deep end. And part of what we do is we have some bias technology that can help us identify different perspectives. So we're not going to try to be a ministry of truth and tell people this is what you should believe, because that's very dangerous, we know. And we're also not going to go for anarchy, where whoever has the most power or popularity kind of manipulates the system for their own benefit, which is usually not for our benefit, but to get us to buy or spend money or vote or act or get angry in the way they want us to. What you need, kind of like a government, you have dictatorships don't really work, and pure anarchy doesn't really work, so you have a balanced system, checks and balances, you have a democratic republic. That's what we can build and know how to do in society for information. And Allsights Technologies actually is doing that kind of technology, and we have tens of thousands of people practicing dialogue, where we have something called Mismatch, which is like the world's worst dating app. You're connected with your opposite, but in groups of 4 or 5, and with testing of different conversation guides, so they actually accidentally discover the humanity of each other and actually listen to each other.
So getting outside the filter bubbles.
Yeah, and we can actually penetrate these filter bubbles with humanity and with different points of view. And when that happens, things change. And you don't have to change it for everybody. You just have to change it for a large enough segment. And if you get 3.5% to 5%, I'll tell you why that percentage is correct, then society changes. Then the world changes and policy changes. And then we can actually get together and start solving these problems.
Sophie, how we're sitting in New York and in one of the most advanced economies in the world, how is this combination of social media and AI-created technology playing out in other parts of the world in less developed media ecosystems?
Well, I think misinformation is a good example of how we think about this, because there's a lot of emotions around misinformation. It exists all over the world. There's good and there's bad news about misinformation. My unpopular opinion is that it is not a technology problem, whether it's AI or something else. It is a user problem. It is a human problem, and so we see this all over the world. I'll give you a practical example. The good news is humans we're less able to influence them than we actually think we are. Right? Exposure to misinformation does not mean they accepted it. So we reported for a year last year on all of these global elections. About half the world's populations went to the polls, and we tracked the AI misinformation in all of these very noisy campaigns in places where you would expect them to have more influence than even here. The actual result on electoral outcomes was negligible, almost zero. Right? So how is that possible? There's so much of it. We can see it. We can track it. Well, belief formation is multifactorial. Research has shown this for decades. AI isn't going to change that. And more importantly, I think we have to separate the feeling of misinformation being bad and the exposure to it from the ability to be literate and understand whether or not it's actually going to influence people's opinions and beliefs. Now, the bad news about misinformation is that the people who are overwhelmingly consuming and creating it is still a small portion of people. There's a lot of people on that bubble who have beliefs that they're curious about, they're searching it out, the algorithm is serving it to them. Algorithms respond to demand. And so there's a large number of people who are susceptible, young people especially so. And so the key issue, I think, that we see all over the world, especially in the US, especially in China, Nigeria, India, all these places, is that content moderation is changing with AI, right? Misinformation is fundamentally subjective, unfortunately, right? Misinformation is societally determined. We all decide this is bad, this is harmful, this is not. Cultures disagree. So right now, countries around the world are building large language models with their own language, which is important for connectivity and access to all these tools. But it means it's going to bake in all of the biases and stereotypes and disagreements within their own cultures, much as it has in ours. And we have AI companies which are unable to pluck out individual biases from the training data sets because the training data sets are so large. So we solved this for the past 30 years imperfectly by using human content moderators in the Philippines and Vietnam, terrible, traumatic jobs, manually doing the dirty work of taking things offline. And we had mechanisms in the system here to hold those tech companies accountable. Regulations, legislation, social pressure, NGOs. When AI gets involved on both sides of creating misinformation and then policing it, we're decoupling that mechanism for accountability because it's much, much harder to attribute where the bias comes from if you can find it at all. So my personal concern, having watched AI misinformation and social media around the world change quite a lot in the last 5 years, is that everywhere around the world, people are adopting these new tools which are designed to meet every need you have, right? This is the nature of technology. It's not any one company. It's not any one country. They're all doing it. When all of our preferences are perfectly met, when all of our systems and tools are customized to us, we end up in this cocoon of cognitive bias, confirmation bias, and dopamine, right? This is a big part of what you're working on. And so the problem when you have an entire country and then an entire world all living in their own isolated cocoons having to do with personalized experiences, personalized entertainment, personalized facts, it's going to be very, very hard to bring people back from that into the cooperative environment that we need to have them in to drive change in any place. So the good news is people are less, you can't influence them as much as you think, but for the people in the bubble, it's going to be even harder to reach them.
Julie, I'm curious, the mechanism of generative AI where it is providing an answer. So it's not like I'm on social media, lots of people are saying all kinds of different stuff. The algorithm is feeding me a certain subsection of it. But this is like, I'm asking a question. And even those of us who know better, I think often are inclined to be like, okay, that's the answer. Especially with young people, how does that change the equation?
Well, backing up for a second, Sophie made the important point that the way we acquire information is not only from what we're seeing on media, but from our environment, our families, our communities. And part of why we're called Mothers Against Media Addiction is because we've seen in our society writ large this addiction to media and a displacement of all the other forms of interaction and human experience that have helped us create communities and build civilizations for millennia. I mean, our species is a social species, and we've always kept our young in community where they've grown up with parents, with relatives, with neighbors, friends in their schools. And so part of why we're seeing so many problems is because we've displaced these critical experiences of interacting, of learning how to tolerate frustration and communicate with people and work your way through difficult experiences. And so if we allow our kids to grow up completely online, on screens 9-10 hours a day, which is starting to happen, we know it's a recipe for disaster in terms of their information acquisition, in terms of their ability to acquire the building blocks they need to be healthy emotionally and to be able to have relationships. So what's exciting me and what I'm very optimistic about is the incredible momentum that's already on our side. Parents are rising up all over the United States to push back against phones in schools because we've seen how kids who have phones in classrooms are spending time on Netflix or gambling or watching pornography, and we're seeing how bullying has led to other problems in the schools. And now we're seeing incredible momentum among state lawmakers to get safeguards in place for these AI products that are actually encouraging children to harm themselves or directing them to content that they shouldn't have. There was one report about an AI tutoring chatbot that, when asked, provided the recipe for fentanyl to children. These are things, with great respect to the previous speaker from IBM, he mentioned this idea of hypothetical risks. We're not talking about hypothetical risks. We're talking about actual dead children. So if you meet the families who have lost kids, if you talk to teachers who are spending time in classrooms with children who are getting most of their news from memes, you understand that the crisis is very real and that there's no time to wait in addressing it.
Is there a new paradigm for regulating this, John? I mean, in the social media era, we had the defining principle was in the US was Section 230, which basically gave a shield to the companies because the content wasn't created by them. Most of this content we're talking about now is ultimately created by the tech companies. Do you see a new approach to tackling the challenges created by this information in the generative AI era?
There's a lot of discussion about different policies people could adopt or governments could adopt. And I'm actually hopeful, but I actually don't think we need, my focus is on building a solution more quickly than the government can come up with a solution. I don't think the governments are fast enough. What you're doing matters right now. And actually recognizing that it's about people first versus technology first is exactly correct. And the thing is we have that technology. Yes, human beings are wired to divide and become tribal. We're also wired to connect, and we yearn for that. What we don't have in society right now are opportunities for that. That is a huge unmet demand in society. where people actually do want to have real relationships. And technology, AI and other technology, can actually bring people to these places, can actually bring people together so they connect in real ways, not in a Twitter troll way or X or Facebook or something, but in a way that actually connects in real ways. And we've been experimenting with that in schools across the country with tens of thousands of students doing this. And we can measure before and after a conversation that's designed in a certain way that they do, that we can actually see that they're more open to different people and different ideas immediately after it. And then we went back 2 months later and see that that change in their attitude towards each other remained after just one conversation. For all of the talk and dangers that are true about technology and all the things about human nature that are dangerous, there's so much good there that we can lean into instead and use those as a way to solve the problem. And that's what we and others are doing and providing other companies so we can actually make that happen and make that, just give people the ability, the option to live a better life. Right now, they don't have it. Let's give it to them. There's a demand for it. There's a craving for it. We can give it to them.
I want to close out our final minutes with giving you two both a chance to talk also about solutions. What is, maybe Julie, you can start and then we'll finish with you, Sophie. What is, if you could pick one thing that you think would be most important to be able to change, whether it's in government, in industry, or elsewhere, what would that be?
I think the most important thing is that we should all collectively not wait to act. If you're a parent, if you're a citizen, if you are a teacher, an educator, join with us at MAMA or any of the other wonderful groups out there and call for these products to do better. We've seen, unfortunately, from the actions of the big tech companies that they will not act in a responsible way. We know from too many whistleblowers that they have been notified when their products are actually harming human beings and harming communities. So we need our government to act. We need them to implement safeguards. We need them to monitor and follow and independently track for compliance so that these companies follow the rules. And then we need them to take action so that companies are accountability when they are creating products that have unnecessary harms to children and adults. So don't wait. Call on your school to ask questions before they implement AI products. Visit us at wearemama.org or join with any of the other movements calling on our lawmakers to take action.
Sophie, what do you think is most important in terms of action?
The word I would have everyone think about is inoculation. Moderation, which is censorship, suppression, whatever you want to call it, is the right short-term response, right? If I'm a policymaker, if I'm a parent, if I'm in a role of authority, right? My goal is to take it off the internet. We know after 30 years of this internet that it doesn't work. Information will find a new home. People that seek it out know how to get there. Again, with open source models with AI, it's only going to get more available over time. Suppression also gives policymakers less signal, right? They know less about what their communities are worried about, what they care about, what we're thinking. So it is a short-term solution, but a long-term problem. The actual solution, which is very, very painful, is inoculation. It is allowing these things to exist, even with consequences, which can be horrible, because we know through, again, decades of social science research, when people encounter misinformation, when they encounter information that is essentially socially antisocial, let's say, if they reject it on their own, it strengthens their conviction in the truth, right? So there's truly an inoculating effect if you can allow people and give them tools and empower them to say, I spot it. Misinformation in particular has signatures. There are sentence structures, there are words, there are ways that we can train community leaders, children, everyone involved at the community level to be able to identify and reject it, which is the long-term antidote to the problem.
Whose responsibility is that? Is that going to be national governments? Are we going to leave it to local governments? Does industry have a role?
I mean, we have a national government now that is actively spreading misinformation every single day. So I think we are not waiting on them at any moment. Corporate actors as well have their own logic and their own goals. So we can pressure them, but it's not necessarily in their interest to do it on their own. Community action, which unfortunately is the thing we are struggling with the most as people descend into these tech cocoons where you need less time with people, you are spending more time online with your online friends. Last point on this, the share of social, like friend content on social media If Instagram, it is 7%. Right? At 7% of the time, people are interacting with people that they know, might know, used to know. 93% of the time, it is entertainment. So even our model of social media itself has to dramatically change because we are already disconnected. So everything we can do at the community level, in the family level, within schools, sports teams, whatever that environment is, that is the long-term solution.
Thank you very much, all three of you. Fascinating. We just scratched the surface of this very important subject. Hopefully, much more discussion to be had. And thank you all for listening.
Thanks, Jason.